Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy Jonathan Macri with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast, coming at you on the morning, late in the morning, on Super Sunday. I am joined by a gentleman that I have not seen in about 12 hours. Jeremy Cohen, good morning. How are you?
Hey, John. Yeah, it's been a long 12 hours. I missed you. I'm glad to see you.
I'm very thankful that I slept for the vast majority of those 12 hours.
I'm glad you could get some sleep.
Yeah, which is not always the case. Shout out to Cornbread. So before we start this episode, which is going to be maybe a little depressing, do you mind if I start off with a couple of shout outs?
Go right ahead.
Okay. I have three. First shout out is to everybody who showed up at T Squared Social last night. Great watch party. Honestly, a much bigger turnout than we had any right to get, given what the weather was. And those brave souls, challenged the elements. They won. Unfortunately, the Knicks did not keep up their part of the bargain. And I got to tell you, when they cut it to 3 in the third quarter, there was some real energy in that place. So start with that shout out. We really do have the best fans in the world. And they, like, it wasn't enough that we had a curse. They came out in the snow to experience the curse firsthand. So, I mean, what more can you say? I have nothing else that I could possibly say, but it's pretty cool.
I'd say yes. Thank you to everyone. I'd also say, is it still a curse? Again, to Andrew's point last time, Knicks did a whole lot of winning when we were there in the playoffs, but it's a losing streak. I'll put it, to me, it's not a curse. It's a streak. What's the
difference between a curse and a streak?
I think a curse is like perpetual streaking, right? Like it goes back so far you've never seen victory in your lifetime, kind of thing. But a good curse, like X was put on it. A good curse, a smart curse. If the devil was smart, he gives you just enough hope to keep coming back for more, right? And that's why we thank everyone who was there, who came back.
There you go. Keep hope alive.
Exactly.
Don't let Satan win. That's the theme of the 24-25 Knicks. Second shout out goes to a very nice dude I met at the Apple store in the Staten Island Mall yesterday, Chris, who I walked in to get a new microphone wire because one of my children, I don't know which one, broke my old one. So Chris, shout out to you, and thanks for being a loyal fan of the show. And then my third shout out goes to you, Jeremy Cohen. You probably have no idea why.
I have no idea why.
You went the extra mile, and to the watch party last night, you wore what I would define as a green sweater.
Oh,
in what I could only imagine was your attempt to reverse jinx the Celtics. And even though it didn't work, I want to give you points for creativity and really putting yourself out there in a significant way, especially since this weekend, if someone sees you in green, not only are they going to think you're supporting the Celtics, but they're going to think you're supporting the Eagles, which I know you're not doing. So you really went, you went the extra 5 miles. Kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you saw my very obvious attempt at wearing a sweater that I picked out ahead of time before I went to a show, a matinee, needing to look somewhat nice while wearing a Knicks Film School Emmanuel Quickley shirt underneath, but not wanting to wear that to a show. Yeah. But figuring that all the other sweaters didn't work. You know what? You're right, John. Yeah. But it's funny because I realized halfway through when I went to the bathroom, I was like, oh crap. I'm wearing green. Idiot. So I'm clearly wearing red for a different team today. For the Chiefs.
I didn't realize when I'm wearing a red hoodie. I didn't even think about that.
See how easy it is to just slip into something and you don't even realize it.
Between now and what time's kickoff? 6:30. I am going to try to muster up the energy to care about this football game tonight. I as of now, I just don't. My concern lies in I hope one of the local stores in the area has wings that I could purchase, because all I really want is to have some good wings today. Okay, enough foreplay here. So you know what? Usually when we do these weekly shows and the Knicks are coming off a winning week, even if the most recent game is a loss, even if it's like kind of a bad loss, we still, I think, are pretty positive. And I think the goal of this episode is to figure out how we come away with some positivity, which I think you're going to have an easier time with than me. But let me set the stage, and then we'll kind of go down this path. So the Knicks, as you mentioned to me, or as you reminded me, because it is easy to forget, they were 2-0 coming in on the week, coming into the Celtics game. And more than that, they had won 7 of their previous 9 or 7 of their previous 8 games, actually, right? Because they had won 5 in a row and then the loss, and then 2 more wins. So that's really good. And they gave us a lot of stuff during that stretch of 7 wins in 8 games to feel really great about and make us feel like, hey, they are for real. And this, like, which is not a way that I think we had felt earlier in the season, even during the 9-game winning streak. And we talked about that. And then last night happened, and I thought DJ Zulo, shout out to DJ, who did the post-game show with me and you and everybody else at T Squared. He really summed it up pretty well, which is to say that loss left you with some real questions about whether, like, regardless of what this Knicks team can do against 90% of the NBA, whether they have enough to beat the only 10% that matters. If you believe that at some point between, like, they're or on their road to a title, they will need to get past one of those teams that gives them very specific fits. And I don't know that there's a team in the league that gives them more fits than this Boston team. And yeah, he centered the conversation a lot around Karl-Anthony Towns, and we'll talk about Cat and his very discouraging performance last night. But that's how he framed it. And I think for a lot of Knicks fans at this point, in light of that game, if you're sitting around asking yourself, like, shoot, man, did we came all this way and we got to this point and we've now built a team that is essentially just a different version of the 90s Knicks, which is like, boy, they're really something else against pretty much everybody. And yet they're not enough of something else against the teams that really matter. So I'm going to just let that sit, and I'm going to turn it to you, and then we can start to dig into where we go from here.
So, I didn't have the opportunity to watch 90s Knicks, so it's harder for me to bring those parallels. But when you said, what'd you say? You said the 90s Knicks.
90s Knicks.
Right. 90s Knicks implies an entire decade of talent. It's not the 1992 Knicks.
No.
It's not the 1997 Knicks. It's the entirety of the 1990s. And the reason I bring that up is because we're, whether by accident or on purpose, essentially putting the same level of pressure of an entire team's run on one season. And we're talking about the start of that run for the Knicks compared to the prime, the peak, all of that, where the Knicks had to go against arguably the greatest player of all time. Yeah. That's not Jason Tatum, as elite as he is. And boy, is he elite.
He looked like the greatest player of all time.
He did. That was a heroic third quarter, and one for the ages, at least if you're certainly watching from the other side. But that's where I keep going back to, John, before you hopped onto the pod for the trade deadline primer, I said to Andrew, because at that point it had just been the Jericho Sims trade, and I wasn't expecting anything else. I knew you weren't expecting anything else. And I said to Andrew, like, I think this is a second round exit team. And I didn't mean that maliciously. I just meant that the Celtics are in second place. The Knicks are in third. The Celtics are a better team than the Knicks. They have had years to iron out their kinks, to get better, to add to their team. They didn't have to kind of gut the team to get their big star because they already had him in-house. So it was very convenient for them. So it's adding accoutrements to an already great house as opposed to building a whole other floor. And I look at this team, as good as they are, as a really good first step. And I don't say this to be defeatist. Like, I still think playoffs, anything goes. But there's a reality here, which is that the Knicks made a couple of huge trades to get to this point, knowing they're not all in on one season, that they've got a range of seasons to worry about. And that this first one, given the hard caps and the complexities of the NBA and the picks and assets that they have left, just really isn't necessarily going to be the one where you strike gold. But you get closer and you learn from it. You win or you learn. What did the Knicks learn? They learned that they're struggling against a team that is an elite 3-point shooting team, that Karl-Anthony Towns is having trouble, especially pick and roll situations, that their players need to be better. And they're simply not right now. And when I see someone like, I saw Steph Bondy's column. I don't know if you saw it in the New York Post today.
I didn't see it. No.
Essentially,
the gist.
The gist of it was, and I thought the column itself, there was merit to it, but the opening was framed as this team needs to make the Eastern Conference Finals in order for this to feel like a success. And I just was shaking my head. Yeah. I was shaking my head because I just felt the Knicks aren't even the second best team in their conference by record. They've yet to beat the two teams ahead of them. And it's a math game where if they're going to make the Final Four in their side of the bracket, they're going to actually have to make the top two of the East. And could they beat the Cavs? Sure. They've got a few more games against them. We'll see how they play. But right now, they're not slated to play the Cavs. They're slated to play the Celtics. And the Celtics are simply a better team. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with saying that. There's no shame in saying the Boston Celtics, who I believe are still the favorites to win the NBA Finals.
Yes.
So it's not even saying, all right, well, let's give excuses. Excuses to me would be, let's stop trying and not add to it and just go back and run the same team out next year as this year. But for this year's team, they're not as good. Like, there's no shame in saying they're not as good. So if they're not as good as the team that's the Celtics, and then they keep playing them and they keep losing to them, mind you, it happened twice. There are two more times for them to try to win.
Yep.
They can turn things around. But from what we're seeing right now, it just feels like, where do we go back to? Where are the goalposts?
Yeah, well, that's
where were they to start the season? Where are they now? Where are they to end the season?
Okay. So I want to just, because I, like you, from the moment they made the Towns trade specifically, and honestly, really, I mean, it was the same thought as when they made the Bridges trade, but it was reinforced when they made the Towns trade, that they were giving themselves, and also, by the way, all three big moves this summer: re-signing OG Anunoby, trading for Mikal Bridges, trading for Karl-Anthony Towns, and actually all four moves this summer, because extending Jalen Brunson. Every single one of those moves. And I know, sorry, I keep going back to it. If you want to add a fifth move in trading away Julius Randle, which was an impending contract situation that was going to come to a head in some way, but it was coming to a head immediately. So all the five of those things were like, this is a 4-year window. You know, you're not guaranteed anything in the NBA, but it all lines up where they should, given the ages of the players, given the contracts of the players, given everything that you've talked about how this team wants to avoid the second apron again next year, so that if they need to go into the second apron the 2 years after that, they could then come back out and you avoid some of the harsher penalties. It all points to, we think we have close to a half decade here to get this done. I'm not sitting here today backing off of that, but I also want to honor, I think, what is a prevailing sentiment here amongst fans of this team, where it's like, don't give me wait till next year, given what we saw last night. From a specific perspective, and this is where I think the conversation has to go, and it has everything to do with the trade deadline and potentially the next bigger transaction cycle, which is the offseason, which is, what is going to change? What is going to change between now and next season, or even the season after that, if you have built your team with this as the foundation? And when I say this is the foundation, I mean Jalen Brunson as a guy that obviously, I mean, talk about heroic performances, as a guy who's going to be on the floor for the vast majority of your time playing, and Karl-Anthony Towns. And those two players are obviously limited defensive players. Now, limited can mean a lot of things. And we saw against the Celtics, one of those limited defensive players gave you an effort. I'm not even talking about it on offense where he was freaking majestic. Gave you an effort on defense that made you believe. That's if we're having a glass half full moment right now. Well, actually, there are a few reasons I think we could actually have a glass half full moment on this, and we'll get to all of them. But the biggest one for me is what Brunson was able to do and how much he was able to stand up when being asked, really for the first time, to take it on the chin defensively and not just let go of the rope. He did that, and that was awesome. But there's another big component here, and that's Karl-Anthony Towns. And so that's what I go back to, which is like, okay, well, you're telling me, okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what they could do this summer. Let's see how it looks differently in year 2 and year 3. I'm not even going to speak for other fans. Speaking for myself, I'm not that I can't see a world where these things, they start to answer some of these questions, but I can't sit here today and say, oh, this is the answer. We just need time to get to it. And I think that's where the issue lies today. Did I get to that point in a clear manner, or was I?
So to summarize, it's essentially saying, like, yes, this is a better team. The emotional side, which is valid, is saying that's still not good enough.
It's not emotional. It's purely from an X's and O's standpoint, which is you went out, forget the money owed to Karl-Anthony Towns. The Nuggets paid Michael Porter Jr. a max salary, and he was at best their 4th most important player on their championship team. And you could argue maybe even lower than that. So we don't need to sit here and equate Towns' salary to Towns' level of importance on the team. But it is, for me, difficult to imagine them scaling the mountaintop without him playing a significant role, which is just means not only what he has to do on offense, that's again, I thought DJ summarized it brilliantly. I like that DJ spent a lot of time in the monologue talking about what Towns could not do to counter Boston when the Knicks had the ball, as opposed to obviously his issues on the defense, because at least if the issues on the defense are there, but he's balancing it out by what he's doing on offense, that's one thing. That wasn't even happening. And that hasn't happened against these great defensive teams, the Oklahoma Cities and the Bostons and the Clevelands of the world. So it's, all right, this guy's going to play a big role in what you have to do just because of how you've constructed your team. He's ostensibly your second most threatening offensive player, and some might argue is your first. So how do you get around the fact that he is such a target on defense? And the best I could do right now today is like, well, don't judge by last night. He has something wrong with his knee because he ended up questionable on the injury report with a knee issue out of nowhere. That's honestly that's the way I'm rationalizing this, is like that. The version that we saw of Karl-Anthony Towns last night, even though we've seen some rough moments from him defensively, that's not really Karl-Anthony Towns. We know Cat can be better than that, and he will be better than that. That's the best I got. But I can't sit here and say definitively that he's going to be much better than that when they play Boston this year in the playoffs, or even next year, whoever they play, who's a great team in the East of the year. Like, that's where I'm coming from. He needs to be a big part of this.
Absolutely. No, he really does. I get where you're coming from, and I do agree. The injury portion is tough because you could say, oh, well, they didn't have OG Anunoby or Mitchell Robinson, but then the Celtics didn't have Kristaps Porzingis or Drew Holiday. So again, the thing I keep going back to, because you have to, because if you're not going to win games, what are you going to learn from these games?
Yes.
And it's the opportunity where, at least if the Knicks are going to play the Celtics in the playoffs and not want to look too far past the first round, because they have to play whatever team they play in the first round in order to get to play the Celtics.
There's no guarantees.
Is, okay, you have 4 games. Keep playing your best players where you can, because you can keep learning from that. Where now we're halfway through the regular season games of the Knicks playing against the Celtics. It was opening night, a time where they were very disorganized, playing the Celtics the night that they hang their banner. And now here we are, 2.5, 3 months later, essentially rolling out a similar version of the team, saying, hey, we've been gelling. We've been playing well. How do we match up? And, the Knicks missing shots for the first quarter in such a copious amount, went 0 of 10 from the floor to start the game.
0 of 10, yeah.
Dug themselves into a hole right away. Yeah. But then to your point, they cut it to 3. So something was working. And
you're right.
And it wasn't purely just like Jason Tatum not getting hot and then he got hot. I mean, it did, right? He did absolutely got hot. But we were talking about this where I asked Benji, would you double Tatum? And his answer, I wouldn't. Yeah. Look at, he had at that point, I think it was 16 points on 14 shots, something along those lines. Peyton Pritchard, he's got wide open threes. He's cooking you. There are other guys who are finding ways that the Celtics having the height advantage that they did, Deuce McBride, when he goes up against Jaylen Brown, it's usually not going to work out for the defender because Jaylen Brown is that good and he's got the extra height to work with. So it's all these mini portions of it. But the Knicks, I know how bad the rest of the third quarter and the fourth quarter looked. And they did look bad. It was not a fun experience if you're a Knicks fan, but they got so close. They were within 3 despite all of the hard work. So it's a question of then why did they let go of the rope? Some of that was just Jason Tatum doing Jason Tatum things. And some of it was, well, why are they in this position to begin with? And I felt encouraged earlier on after that initial run, and that was problematic. It was problematic to go 0 of 10 to start the game while the Celtics start to hit their shots. That's not a good thing. But the Knicks showed a level of resilience that they just hadn't had in that original Boston game.
Yeah.
And if we're taking moral victories, because we know we can't take the actual victory because the Celtics certainly grabbed that and didn't let go. You have to find something. So for me, it's not all of a sudden of like, well, I feel so great about a Knicks Celtics series. It's not that, but there are encouraging signs where you keep playing a team, you keep learning these lessons, you keep doing, you take yourself out of position to hurt yourself because you know what works and what doesn't. So it felt like I'm happy to see the Celtics play the Knicks. And even if the Celtics beat the Knicks 2 more times, which is still a very likely scenario, I'm not going to feel happy about that by any stretch, but you at least should get closer and closer to understanding how to beat this team. And if the answer is not internal, then it will be reviewed, and I'm sure this will happen regardless, externally by the front office to see how they make changes, how the Celtics as a team will continue to be. I mean, they didn't have Drew Holiday, of course, as mentioned, but the Celtics, without going too far into the cap stuff, the Celtics are above the second apron this year. The odds of them being above the second apron next year are less. And it's not going to keep. So they've got to cut corners and they've got a lot of expenses. So how the Celtics
they're process being sold, which is
exactly
a big looming thing that the entire league is kind of hoping. All right, maybe that helps tilt the balance a little bit.
And if Fenway Sports Group, which was rumored to have interest in the Celtics, buys the Celtics, that's not good for Celtics fans that want the Celtics to keep spending because Fenway Sports Group, they especially with the Red Sox, they haven't spent quite as much. They're very spread out in terms of their assets. I believe they also own Liverpool. I think it's Liverpool that they own. But with that said, it's like this is the Celtics peak right now as well. And the Knicks are not at their peak. And so if you're a Knicks fan, which if you're listening to this, you probably are, what you need to also remember here, and there are other teams too that are going to hit their peaks at the same time the Knicks hit their peaks. The Knicks aren't at their peak. The Celtics are.
I agree with that. And so, I want to be very clear. I completely agree with that. Like everything you said in the opening, my pushback is more because I know that's the sentiment right now is like, don't tell me next year. But what you just said cannot be lost on anyone. This is not the best version of this Knicks team yet. It's just not.
It's not. And so, and I hear you exactly on the don't tell me about next year. But then if we're saying this isn't the best version to come of the Knicks team, it's understandable. And it's okay. Well, also, will this peak of the Celtics last year was it their best season? And now did they hit their peak and now they're coming down? But hey, coming down is still really damn good. That could be the case. So it's then the question of is this Celtics team that we're seeing 2 years from now going to be the best version compared to where the Knicks will be 2 years from now? That's all that I'm saying. Right. Or even next season. Yeah. Anything can happen. It could take an injury it could take luck. All it takes is just one or two things to go your way and the dynamic completely changes. And so that's why I don't want to keep feeling like a defeatist, just like forget about the season. Not saying that at all, but clearly the Knicks their front office felt like there's a level of comfort with their long-term view and with how the Celtics are playing and how the finances shake out, where the Knicks haven't crossed that threshold that teams are allowed to do without penalty, and the Celtics already have. So that's fine that the Celtics are doing it because they have a win now team, and the Knicks have a win now team, but they also can think about winning later as well without the same level of impact that the Celtics have already experienced because they crossed that second apron. So it's a bad game. It just is. I don't really know how to sum it up other than that. I
want to end on a high note or move on to a portion of this conversation that is on a higher note, and not because you say I don't want to be a defeatist, not because I want to be an apologist, but because I do think there is always a temptation, especially after you lose a game like this, to dispense with or forget about the other side of the coin, which is the positive aspect of it. And like the team that we've seen come together and perform over the previous rough 2.5, 3 weeks, when you add that to what they had already accomplished, not that they had accomplished much, but they had put together a statistical profile even before the 7 wins in 8 games, many of which I think we would all consider the most impressive wins of the season. They had already gotten to a point where look, they put together this team with the theory being we're going to be the best or one of the best offenses in the NBA, and we will be able to defend well enough to beat pretty much any team. I think that they checked those boxes well enough over the first 40 plus games, over the first basically half of the season. And then the 8 games going into the Celtics game, I felt like they leveled up, where it's all right, now we're going to take the theory of, all right, this thing works, and we're going to put it to the test against some better teams and in some trying circumstances. And I think they reached another level with that. Now, there's one more level that they have to reach, which is we have to be able to show that we could beat any team in the NBA. Clearly, they have not gotten past that level yet. But here's the good news. It's the last level. There are no other levels after that. Once you reach that level, that's it. You're good. And I do think that there are some things that should note about this particular game. Number one, we talked about Karl-Anthony Towns. He showed up on the injury report literally a couple hours before game time. He had been probable. Then he went to questionable with the knee issue. So I don't want to beat that dead horse, but the level of bad he was on defense was I think you have to at least mention it, right? To me, it has to be one of the leading stories from this. So there's that. There's the fact that they didn't have OG Anunoby, which I want to get back to in a second. And if you look at the other starters besides Jalen Brunson, off the top of your head, can you get, or maybe you know it already, so if you know it, just tell me, but how many total 3-point attempts did the rest of their starters combine for attempts?
Starters?
Not Brunson.
I'll say 4.
Oh, you way undershot. It was 9. They made 4. Okay. They made 4. They went 4 for 9. But
oh no, yeah, I was thinking of the makes.
Oh yeah, they made 4 out of 9, which is a good percentage. But there is no universe where you are beating this Celtics team where 4. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many threes your fifth starter put up, and unfortunately the Knicks don't employ prime Steph Curry, so the fifth starter is never going to put up 15 threes. Brunson put up 7. That's great for him. The rest of the starters combined to put up 9. So I look at and that I think is there's a Precious Achiuwa angle to that, and we have to say there was no OG Anunoby. He makes the massive difference that OG makes, and if you don't believe that, Tom Thibodeau told you exactly what he thought of the value or lack thereof that Precious Achiuwa was adding to this game when he went with Deuce McBride over Precious Achiuwa to start the third quarter. So that is a massive, massive difference. Mikal Bridges, one of his worst games in quite some time. Josh Hart, I would argue that it was his. I know he ended up with some numbers. I thought the first half certainly was the worst Josh Hart half we've seen all season, and this was one of his 5 worst games. Towns we talked about, and then no OG. So you combine all of that, and it's basically there was one prominent Knick who played well. Campaign, I thought hit some shots. He gave them a nice spark. But I didn't even mention Deuce McBride. Deuce McBride, who everybody, we looked at as part of the answer against this specific Celtics team. Deuce McBride, quiet. It was quiet, but quietly went 1 for 8.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your top 6 Knicks. One of those top 6 played well, and you didn't even have your one of your most important players in OG Anunoby. So I think you look at all of that, and then you bring the conversation to where you just brought it a minute ago, which is are they going to get a better, are they going to fix the Karl-Anthony Towns problem, so to speak, in any upcoming transaction cycle? I mean, never say never. Again, Luka Doncic just got traded. I would expect Karl-Anthony Towns to be here for the foreseeable future. So, but putting that aside, if you get OG back and you get one more significant piece that can be a hashtag meaningful difference maker in these sorts of games, that maybe allows you to play Karl-Anthony Towns instead of, what did he play last night? Actually, only played 28 minutes last night. And it was notable that he was a minus 26 in those 28 minutes. Meanwhile, you had Jalen Brunson played 36 minutes. He was a minus 19. Mikal Bridges minus 11 and 34. But you look at that Towns number, minus 26 and 28 minutes, it tells you all you need to know about this game. Maybe you get a piece where you bring them in and it's all right, that piece is going to allow us in this specific series to limit how much we need to depend on Karl-Anthony Towns. And maybe it's a 25-minute or 24-minute a game series for Towns, and you figure out ways to survive and make the most use of him in that time. And I think these are all look, I know me, I always want to have this belief there is an answer coming down the pike that is the be all end all, that we're going to get, this thing is going to happen. And once the thing happens, we could all sit back and say, yes, now have the team, right? We know that this team is capable of going. I don't think that moment's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that they can't still put improvements on what they already have now. So that's kind of where I'm at this point.
It's fair. I agree.
Yeah.
I think we did it justice.
Yeah, I think so too. Look, Leon Rose,
and also last thing is to say, if you're a Knicks fan and you're saying, I hear all that, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, Knicks need to win and they're not winning. I get it. I get that too. I think it's totally fair to feel look, this is a team that should be winning. They're not winning, and I'm upset by it.
Except they are winning. They're winning a lot. Right. It's just not, of course. Winning.
And there's but it's focusing on that upper echelon of teams that we talked through. So I get it. If you feel they're a great team, but I need more. I totally understand that viewpoint. It's just not one. It's not one that I share quite this season, because to your point earlier, John, we did see that jump. We saw the team that was a good team that became better. They just did. They're a better team than they were last season. They do things differently, but there's a level of trust that I have more with this team than that team. But that team also, that iteration of the Knicks with Julius, with Brunson, with Hartenstein, you name the player.
Yeah.
They also had at least a season and a half to come together and gel. The only player was really OG Anunoby, who came in last season. Halfway through.
Sorry. But finish, and we have some breaking news
with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Yes, Giannis
out for several weeks with a calf strain.
Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, but in terms of with this team, they had time to gel. They had time to figure out their strengths and weaknesses. It's a new version of that. Gonna have to just need more time to see how they struggle and where they can make those inroads.
I'm glad you ended it there, because that's where I was going to end it. And again, this is going to sound like an apologist. This is going to sound defeatist. This season was always one for me, less about they got to make the Eastern Conference Finals, which I never have once said that. You've never once said that. That's not an approach that I think is wise to take. This is a season of information gathering and figuring out what works, what doesn't. And once you know what does not work, and once you know what does work, you go back. And as you said to start this conversation, because you always get right to the point, what do you need to do to get you to tilt the balance more in your favor, to get more things that do work, less things that don't work? And so right now, the information that we have gathered about their ability to beat these top teams is like, it looks pretty black and white, right? It's very clear, but it is, you are getting more information and you are figuring out, and like, look, it doesn't feel great if you're a Knicks fan this morning, but there's another place you could go. And that's, imagine like Phoenix. They've gained a lot of information this season.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what they could do with that information? Dick. because they have no out clause, because they have gone all in to a degree that they cannot get out of. And that's just the first team that comes to mind. There are probably a few other teams. I just mentioned Milwaukee. Talk about shifting around deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, there are teams that go for it in their effort to win, to bring a title home, that if it doesn't work, and they get the information like, all right, this isn't working well enough. Well, they don't have a second door to walk through. That's not the case with the Knicks. And that's, again, I understand it feels like, oh my God, Towns is never going to be able to defend. Nothing else matters. I don't view it that way. I don't think you view it that way. And I don't think if you're a Knicks fan, you should view it that way. I think this team still has some moves that they could make. Again, they couldn't do it this transaction cycle. A lot more transaction cycles to come. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And last thing I'll say, I listened to a really great podcast this past week, and the premise of it was let them. And so what does that mean? It's usually, and just in life, it's great, where you let them show you where they're coming from. Let them do things. Okay, great. But then let me respond to it. Let me react to that. Don't try to change it and determine, is this the best thing for me? And I'm just thinking through the context of the Knicks, right? You could do it in two different ways. Number one, as a fan, right? Okay, let them play. Let me respond accordingly. Let me determine how I feel about this team, whether it's, we're all entitled to do that. Go for it. But then there's the factor of the front office. Okay, so let the Knicks themselves play. But then if you're the front office, your thought is, let me figure out how I change anything that needs to be changed. And part of that, and maybe this is the segue into talking a little bit more about the deadline, where the front office is letting them play. And the front office perspective is, let me determine, is it better for us to go in on this season further than we already have, or to let it ride in the future?
Yeah.
And the front office determined, we're going to not do anything that hurts our chances this year, but we may not do anything that drastically helps it more than adding someone like Mitchell Robinson. And they're saying to you, their actions are saying to us as fans, we like this season a lot. Clearly we do, because we look at the team we've put together, but we like the seasons to come more than we like this season. If the Knicks felt like this season was truly their season, I think there's more urgency, even with the limited assets that they have available, 3 days ago. But they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? Because they themselves were letting them tell us that they are more comfortable looking 2, 3, maybe 4 years down the line than this season right now.
My only thought on the trade deadline, be very brief. I think because it's a combination of what you just said, and it's a combination of what we just talked about before. The one major piece of information that we still don't have about this team is what they look like if you put an elite defensive center on the roster. And I understand Mitchell Robinson is not the elite defensively in every single aspect of the game. And the one other downer that we haven't said is like the notion that like, oh, if Mitch was there for that Celtics game, the Celtics game would have been 100% different. Well, no, that's not really the case, because it's not like Mitch has been gangbusters defensively against, this version of Boston either. That said, I can't sit here and say that definitively, because I don't have the information, because we haven't seen it. So that is a major, major, major piece of information that they're still lacking. And for them to sit back and say, you know what, whatever Mitch can get us, whatever Mitch's contract could get us, which by the way is obviously at a very low value, that's not more valuable to us than seeing what the team looks like with Mitch back. And then the other part of that, I think, is, and again, this ties into Mitch's lack of value at the moment. They didn't see anything else on the marketplace worth cashing in that chip for. And I think if you look at the marketplace, you look at the salaries that were around, and you look at the options of what they could have gotten, I think that makes perfect sense. So I'm very, to say that I'm very comfortable with how they approach the deadline would be an understatement. But I think it's not just because I want to, be like, oh, Leon Rose, he's doing a great job, we're going to give him a pass. No, that's, every one of these transaction cycles has to be approached with its own look on it. And if you look at this from an objective point of view, it made sense that the Knicks did not do more or do something else, to me at least.
We've also talked about on the deadline of wanting to gauge fans' reactions of who they would have wanted. And none of the players that were listed by those listening at the time were needle movers. They just weren't. None of those players was going to be the difference between the Knicks being where they're at and potentially being the Boston Celtics in a 7-game series. And then, oh, by the way, facing what would presumably be the Cavaliers. Oh, and then getting to a point where they'd then play the best team in the West. Like that wasn't going to be the difference between one or the other.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be more than that. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take the transaction windows that we've talked about. And also, I say this as someone who has pushed Mitchell Robinson out the door more times than he can count. Like, I fully acknowledge that, especially if there's a healthy Mitchell Robinson, he's a better player than you're going to acquire at the deadline. And that's
that's without question.
Exactly. It's always just been a matter of the if factor. So if he's healthy, if he's playing, that's great. You're not going to get better value than what he provides. But everything else about it, again, it's like, to your point earlier, I truly don't mean it to sound apologist or defeatist. It's just a matter of, it's the if you give a mouse a cookie theory, right? Like, if you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want milk. If they want milk, they're going to want whatever's next in that grape book. But and there's nothing wrong with the don't care how, I want it now, Veruca Salt mindset. But also at a certain point, there's a limit to what you can do. You're probably tapped out financially. You're tapped out asset wise, largely. Yeah. What you can do is not going to get you the finished result. And then if the difference between what you did and what you didn't do is still going to be the end result this season, then why do it? Why do it? Why push it further if it's really not going to make a significant difference? Why not wait until you have a better opportunity to pick yourself up, learn more of the information that you're talking about, and then strike? Because you have an entire season's worth of data and a playoff's worth of data to then go back and say, what do we need to work on? What can we fix? Because going into this, especially if you were to face against Celtics and say, well, we know exactly where we need to beef up on. Do we? Like, the Knicks played the Celtics once prior to the deadline, and we know the reasons for why they lost. So we can project as to why or how they could beat Boston in the playoffs and what they could do. We could also let it ride. And then next season, you say, okay, we know exactly how we lost. If they lose, how we played them, how we can get better. All of those things, data we don't have that we think we know, but we don't know for certain. And it's if you're only saying it every season counts, every season does count. But if you're only reducing it to this season, then you're losing sight of the other seasons. And this season's also not lost. The Knicks still have a very great team, and they're learning and they're growing. So I'm excited to see how they approach the rest of the second half. But I can understand why, if you look at the Rockets game and say, that was great, but they didn't have Şengün, they didn't have VanVleet, and you still barely won because of Jalen Brunson. But they won. Or the Raptors game. Well, it was a lot closer than it should have been, and didn't like that. Agreed. They won. Like, we're learning. But we're also not, it's not, those games weren't at the expenses of the result, which was a victory. Two victories.
Quick break to tell you about our friends from Rocket Money. So the start of the new year, perfect time to get organized, set goals, and obviously prioritize what matters most. For me, a father of two daughters, and a husband who is responsible for taking care of the family's finances, Rocket Money came in handy at the best possible time. I tell you, I signed up for many subscriptions over the course of my years as a dad, and as my daughters have gotten older, they don't need those subscriptions anymore. For instance, things that pertain to when they were a toddler or were even when they were just born. I had completely forgotten that I had signed up for a number of those. By using Rocket Money, I was able to get a very clear idea of all of the subscriptions that I had, and I was able to see very obviously which ones I didn't need anymore. And now I no longer have them, so I'm saving money thanks to Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/game-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/game-on. rocketmoney.com/game-on. The Rockets game in particular was so encouraging because the challenges that they faced in that game were challenges that earlier in the season, I think we would have thought they would not have been able to overcome. And they overcame them. And that's going to be a good transition to giving out our game balls for the week, which I have the luxury of giving out first. Such an asshole. And here's the thing. And this is why I am going to continue to feel very optimistic about the long-term outlook of the Knicks. The hardest thing to get in the league is the number one guy, the guy that you know at the end of the day is going to be there and then you could rely on, and that could be the best player on a team that could win the title. And not that I personally needed this week as proof that we had that guy, but if ever you did need it, you got some more this week, because obviously I'm giving my game ball to Jalen Brunson. I'll just read his stats first for the 3 games this week. 35 points a game, shot 51% from the field, even though he only made 6 of 18 from deep, got to the line 12 times a game, made over 90% of his free throws, almost 7 assists, a little bit more than 2 turnovers. It was as good a week as Jalen Brunson had as a Knick. And I think for as incredible as the Rockets game was, and I do think the Rockets game was his game of the year, I would almost argue that I'm more encouraged by what he did against Boston. And I said it at the top of the show, and I'll say it again. For him to kind of answer the bell and show like, yeah, look, is it always going to be pretty? No. Am I going to get, are they going to too small me a few times? Yeah, they are going to too small me a few times. But Brunson switched, and he had tough matchup after tough matchup. And that was not why the Knicks lost this game. So the fact that he showed you like, hey man, I'm up for this. And it maybe helped you envision a world where, again, in a future playoff series with the Celtics, maybe for 20 or 25 minutes a game, Cat isn't on the floor. And maybe it's Brunson as the only quote unquote defensive weak spot, and everything else is like switchable, and like they're shooting on the rest of the floor. Like that is a world that we could now envision a little bit more easily because of what he was able to show you on defense against Boston. So for that reason and 100 more, Jalen Brunson will get my game ball.
Yeah, easy choice. Agreed. Had a fantastic week. This is a tough one for me because I feel like no one truly played 3 great games. So I'm going to give it to Karl-Anthony Towns because he was lights out. I hear you. I know, because that Celtics game was enough.
This is going to be like,
but can I tell you why?
First, but keep going.
But his performance against the Rockets was fantastic. Was it not?
He was very good.
All right, let me ask you this then. If I didn't pick Karl-Anthony Towns, if you were in my shoes, which we know you're not because you won the week, but if you were in my shoes, who would you be picking otherwise? Because I look at Josh Hart's game last night, and that was such a sour moment that I don't think it really adds up to it. Mikal Bridges, I didn't think he had the best week, and he certainly didn't have a great Celtics game. So,
man,
like, I'm not going to give it to Precious Achiuwa. OG Anunoby's not playing. What direction am I going in if we're looking at players?
I would have probably gone. I might have gone with Bridges. And you could honestly, I would have thought about going with Precious, but I in good faith, I wouldn't have been able to go with Precious either. I would have probably given it to Bridges because he had the Celtics game was really bad from an offensive standpoint.
Sure.
But yeah.
I don't like the choices that I have, to be quite candid. Like I don't think they're great options here, but I know the problem is that on a macro level with Cat, I think that was a real problem. But on more of the week level, if I'm picking from a few guys, that's where I'm at. Like it's not like, yes, like right to the front, sir. It's more just like all right, Karl, I'll give it to Karl, that sort of thing. But I mean, if I could give it to Jalen Brunson, I would. So you know what? Maybe I'll just give it to Jalen Brunson. I'll echo your sentiments and we'll leave it at that.
All right. So that's an easy transition to Detention, which we give to somebody who needs to sit down and think about what they did for the week. I am going to give it to Karl.
Okay.
And I do so.
It's not your turn, though.
Oh, shoot.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not the first time I've done this.
It's definitely, and it will not be the last.
It will not be the last because
you know what? I'm going to give it to Jonathan Macri. No,
that's fine. Please, by all means. No, it's your turn.
I'll give it to KFS. I'll give the Detention to KFS. We're going to keep playing. We're going to keep hosting games T squared, and there's nothing people can do about it. The snow hasn't even stopped us. So if the weather's not stopping us, we're just going to keep doing it. So it's going to go to us.
That's fine. I should give it to us as well. No, I'm going to give it to Cat, which I imagine if maybe you would have thought about doing too.
Yeah, I think Schrodinger's cat.
It
give me some reaction on that one. That was a good one.
It was great. It was. I'm sorry. Like the no sell there was that was as bad as KFS's T squared performance. It's the singular question about this team. I mean, for all the reasons that we just talked about, I'm not going to rehash it. And you saw it just under the brightest of lights last night. He was my wild card for the season before the season started, which again, it's like, if you want to be someone who has skepticism about whether the Knicks are ever going to be able to climb the mountaintop, I think hold on, you have the highest paid player and a guy who's your all-star and probably your all-NBA, one of your all-NBA players as your biggest wild card, as your biggest question mark about the team. Yeah, that's generally an issue. But then again, you could have said the same thing about Jaylen Brown last season Celtics. Hell, you could have even said the same thing about Jason Tatum, although I think he was probably a little bit more of a sure thing. But you certainly could have said it about Brown before last year. Now, Brown's issues are different than Cat's issues. But like every NBA team has this. Before the Nuggets won the title, you could have said it about Jokic, specifically Jokic's defense. Can Jokic's defense ever get to a point where they could win 4 playoff rounds? The year before that, it was the year before that was the Warriors, but the year before that was the Bucks. You could have said like some of the issues that they had in terms of their half court offense with Giannis as like the guy who's going to have the ball in his hands, and yet he's a non-shooter. Like there's always pretty much every team before they win it all has a major question mark about a really important piece. And so for these Knicks, the question mark is on Towns. Don't look great right now, which is why I put him in detention, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be this way. So that's where we're going there. Okay. And now the moment of truth. Are you mathematically eliminated at this point? That's the only question I have.
I don't know. Probably.
I don't know either. We'll
still play. You know what I'll do? I'll tank for next year.
You're going to tank for a better draft.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'll do that.
So are we only paying? Andrew is here. He's in the background. I don't know. Andrew, I didn't see the private chat, and neither did you. Andrew was saying Huck Porty for your game ball was a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking on the cat portion, to be quite honest. I was trying to make myself feel better, but
yeah, we were all kind of out of it. Okay, so we are picking 5 games. That's what Andrew was telling us. So the next 5 games for the Knicks are, as I pull up the schedule right now. Okay, so the 2 before the All-Star break, we have a tricky little back-to-back going to Indiana on Tuesday night. Oh, that's on Tuesday. I don't know why I thought that game was on Monday. So they are going to have 2 days off before they face the Pacers. So that's nice. And then quick turnaround, home against Atlanta. And then the first 3 games after the All-Star break, Thursday against the Bulls at home. Then on the road the very next night. It's tough to back. It's tough a back-to-back as you're going to get all year. That's in Cleveland. And then Sunday in the Lions Den at Boston. That's the ABC game at 1 p.m. So it is my pick first. I am going to go. I'm not gonna think about it too much, and I'm gonna go 3-2.
Figured. I'll go 2-3.
You go 2-3, really? Okay. I thought you might do 4-1.
2-3.
Don't have it in you. Okay.
I mean,
that's fine.
If you think that a Celtics game is going to be chalk, and if you don't feel great about a Cavs game, then the Knicks have to win all 3 of the games that came prior to that. Which they could. They could do it. They could even win against the Cavs or the Celtics. But I'll go 2-3.
I am going to make I think that they are going to win one of the games against Boston or Cleveland. I don't know which one, but I think they're going to win one of those games. And if they don't, they could still go 3-2. So that's where we're going to go. Although I think if they lost both of those games and we were then sitting there with an 0-7 record against the top teams, if they lose them close, I think that will make a difference. But look, we'll talk about them when the time comes. All right, that's it. Anything else from you, Jeremy?
Do we think Josh Hart gets named to the All-Star team, or do we think Trae Young?
Oh, with Giannis out now.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it will be. I don't even know who the hell the freaking Eastern Conference All-Stars are off the top of my head.
I think
does it matter that he's a front court player, or does that not matter?
It probably might have an impact, sure, but I think especially from a name brand perspective, Andrew's saying Trae because this is what happened last year.
There's no Hawk on the All-Star team, right?
Correct.
I think it will be. Dame's not on the team, right?
I don't believe he was named the All-Star team, or LaMelo.
I don't think it's going to be LaMelo. I know he wasn't named the team, and I don't think it will be LaMelo.
All I know is this is not a players' league; it's a stars league. And the NBA will want their stars there. And I can't think of another star in the East, not named Trae Young, who would fit that, unless it's LaMelo. And I just don't think LaMelo's going to make it over Trae.
I think it'll be Trae Young. I do not think Josh Hart's going to make the All-Star team. I don't know, maybe if he had an exceptional like last week. But okay. This was great. Thank you, Jeremy. And again, one more shout out to everybody who came through to T-Squared Social last night. The next watch party, because I know everybody just can't wait to find out when the Knicks are going to lose again, will be the February 21st game against Cleveland. I will be in Florida for that one, so it's unfortunately going to be the one watch party that I'm not going to be able to attend, but everybody else should. And here's the thing. If they win that game and I'm not there, we know then definitively what the problem is. And I will stand up here and I will sing the whole Taylor Swift song if you want me to, if they win that game and I'm not there. Because at least we'll know. And it's all about information gathering. It's all about getting evidence. And that's what we're in the business doing, getting evidence. Okay. Thanks everybody for checking out another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Don't forget, if you dig the show, Help us out, help spread the word, give us a 5-star rating, give us a nice review. Obviously, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, as we get closer and closer to 20,000 YouTube subscribers, help us get to that goal. And we will be back with more funny games before you know it.